She drove 4 hours through the dark to get home early and walked straight into her own nightmare. In her backyard, under her string lights, beside her rose garden that she planted with her own hands. Her best friend of 12 years stood in a white wedding dress, holding the hands of the man Imani Brooks had loved for 4 years. The wedding music was still playing when their eyes met, and nobody moved. If you've ever trusted someone completely, and had that trust turned into a weapon used against you, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The drive back from Savannah was supposed to take 4 hours and 20 minutes. Imani made it in 3 hours and 52. She hadn't planned to leave early. Aunt Cheryl was stable. The doctor had used that word specifically, stable. And Imani had written it down in the small notebook she kept in her purse because she had learned long ago that in hospital corridors, words disappeared the moment they were spoken. Stable. She'd underlined it twice. Then she'd sat in that pale green waiting room for another 6 hours just to be certain, drinking bad coffee from a machine that took her dollar and gave back something that tasted like burnt rubber and disappointment. By Thursday morning, Aunt Cheryl was sitting up in bed arguing with a nurse about the remote control. That was when Imani knew she could go. She packed her overnight bag slowly. She was a woman who did most things slowly, not because she lacked urgency, but because she had spent 32 years learning that rushing produced mistakes, and she had already made enough of those to last several lifetimes. She folded her extra blouse. She tucked her toiletry bag into the side pocket of her duffel. She kissed Aunt Cheryl on the forehead and told her she loved her, and Aunt Cheryl, 71 years old and sharp as a blade even in a hospital gown, grabbed her wrist before she could pull away.
"You look tired, baby." "I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because I'm always fine." Aunt Cheryl gave her the look, the one she'd been giving Imani since Imani was 9 years old and lying badly about breaking a window with a baseball. "Minjay treating you right?" Imani smiled. It was the smile she'd practiced, warm enough to be convincing, controlled enough not to crack. "He's good, Auntie." Aunt Cheryl released her wrist but didn't look convinced. She never looked convinced about Minjay. She'd said so exactly once, 18 months into Imani and Minjay's relationship, at a family cookout where he'd shown up 40 minutes late in a car that cost more than some people's houses. "That man has too many doors," Aunt Cheryl had said. "Man that busy keeping doors shut is hiding something behind every one of them." Imani had laughed it off. She was embarrassed now. Driving north on I-16 with the windows cracked and Solange playing low through the speakers, that she had laughed it off. She wasn't thinking about Minjay, though. Not specifically. She was thinking about her 7th graders who had a reading comprehension test on Monday that she hadn't finished grading. She was thinking about the leak under her kitchen sink that she'd been meaning to call someone about for 3 weeks. She was thinking about the rose garden in the backyard, which needed watering, and whether she had left the back porch light on. She was not thinking about the fact that when she'd told Minjay she was going to Savannah for the weekend, Thursday through Sunday, she'd said, "I'll be back Sunday evening, maybe Sunday night." Something had shifted in his face. Something small and fast, like a shadow crossing a wall. She'd clocked it and dismissed it. He'd smiled after, kissed her temple, said, "Take care of your aunt, baby. I'll be here when you get back." She'd driven away and not looked in the rearview mirror. Now it was Friday afternoon, and she was 40 minutes from home, and the only thing she wanted was a shower and her own bed and 8 hours of sleep that nobody interrupted. She almost stopped for gas in Macon. Her tank was at a quarter, and she could have pulled off, could have taken another 15 minutes, but she was tired and close, and she told herself she'd fill up tomorrow. She kept driving. That decision, that small, unremarkable decision about a gas tank, would live in her memory for years afterward. Not because it was significant, but because if she had stopped, she would have been 30 minutes later. And 30 minutes later, it might have been over. She might never have seen it. She pulled onto her street at 4:47 in the afternoon. She noticed the cars first. There were too many of them. Parked along both sides of the residential street in a way that said event, not neighborhood. 3 of them in front of her own house, including a black Escalade she didn't recognize and a silver Mercedes that belonged to someone she couldn't immediately place, but that nagged at her with a familiar wrongness. She slowed down, frowning, and had to park half a block away because there was nowhere closer. She sat in her car for a moment. The street was quiet.
Afternoon sunlight lay long and gold across the pavement. A dog barked somewhere. A child's bicycle was tipped over on the neighbor's lawn. Everything looked normal. Everything was normal. She got out of the car, duffel bag over one shoulder, and walked toward her house. The front door was closed. The curtains were drawn in the living room window, which she noticed but didn't quite process, because she was already pulling out her keys and thinking about whether she had ibuprofen in the medicine cabinet, because she had a headache building behind her left eye that had been building since Macon. She went around the side of the house. She used the back gate, the one that opened directly into the backyard, because the duffel was heavy and the path from the back gate to the kitchen door was shorter than going through the front. She'd been doing it that way for 3 years. Muscle memory. She pushed the gate open without thinking, and then she stopped. The sound hit her before her eyes could process what they were seeing. A slow, deliberate melody from a string quartet she couldn't identify, drifting out across her backyard in the warm September air, and underneath it the low murmur of people, 20 or 30 of them standing in careful rows on the grass, dressed in their best clothes, faces turned toward the rose garden. Her string lights were on. The ones she'd spent an entire Saturday in May stringing between the oak tree and the back fence, because she'd wanted the backyard to feel magical, because sometimes the world was too hard and you needed a little magic in your own space. They glowed soft gold in the afternoon light, unnecessary but beautiful, the way she'd always imagined them. Under those lights, beside her rose garden, stood Nia Carter, in a white dress. Imani's brain performed a function she would later recognize as dissociation, a clean, merciful split between the information arriving through her eyes and the part of her mind that was supposed to interpret it. She saw Nia, she saw the dress, she saw the flowers woven into Nia's locks, small white blooms that Imani recognized as ranunculus from the garden beds along the fence, because she had planted those herself from seeds she'd ordered online. She saw the man standing with his back to her, broad-shouldered in a dark suit, his hands open and reaching toward Nia's. She recognized the suit. She'd picked it out. She'd stood in a department store in Buckhead 6 months ago and held up 2 jackets and asked him which one he liked better, and he'd said, "You choose," because he always did that, deferred to her on things he called minor, and she'd chosen the darker charcoal because it brought out the line of his jaw, and he'd worn it to a dinner she'd cooked for the 2 of them on their 4th anniversary, and she'd thought then that she was the luckiest woman she knew. Minjae. The name arrived in her head like a stone dropping into still water. For a long moment, she would never be able to calculate exactly how long, but it felt like the length of a held breath. Nobody moved. Then someone in the back row turned. An older woman, someone Imani didn't know, someone's relative by the look of her dress. And her eyes went wide and she made a small sound, and the sound was enough. Heads turned. The murmur died. The string quartet, a recorded track she realized now, playing from a Bluetooth speaker on the patio table, kept going for 3 more bars before someone cut it off with a fumbling swipe. Nia saw her. Minjae turned around. Imani did not scream. She did not cry. She did not throw her duffel bag. She did not say anything at all. She just stood at the back gate of her own home, holding the strap of her bag, looking at the scene in front of her with an expression that she could feel but couldn't name. Not yet, not in the moment. Something that was all the wrong emotions arriving simultaneously and canceling each other out, leaving a surface that looked to everyone watching like absolute calm. Imani. Minjae's voice. Low, strained. He'd taken 1 step toward her and stopped. She looked at him. She looked at Nia. She looked at the guests who were now frozen in their rows, a tableau of caught people, each of them doing the math of their own complicity. She recognized 3 faces. 3 people she'd met through Nia, had dinner with, exchanged numbers with. All 3 of them had known. She could see it in the way not one of them could hold her gaze. She turned and walked back through the gate. She sat down on the side steps of her house, the steps that led up to the kitchen door, 4 wooden steps painted gray, with a chipped 3rd step she'd been meaning to fix. And she put her duffel bag down beside her, and she sat with her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands. She didn't stay like that long. Maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes during which the backyard erupted in the kind of noise that disaster makes. Low voices, fast movement, the scrape of chairs, the particular silence of people trying not to be heard while fleeing. She listened to the sound of her backyard being vacated. She listened to car doors, engines, the crunch of tires on the street out front. When she lifted her head, the back gate was still hanging open, and the string lights were still on, and through the gate she could see her rose garden and the chairs and the scattered flower petals on the grass. One of the ranunculus blooms from Nia's hair had fallen near the gate. It was lying in the dirt with its face up, white and perfect and obscene. She went inside. She filled a glass of water at the kitchen sink and drank half of it. She stood at the counter with her hands flat on the cold granite. The kitchen smelled normal. Coffee from this morning? No, that wasn't right. She hadn't been here this morning, and the smell was too fresh. Coffee from today? Someone else's morning, in her kitchen, using her machine. She set the glass down carefully. The back door opened. She heard him before she saw him, heard the specific weight of his footfall, the way he always came in from the left because he favored his left side. An old injury in his right knee he'd never fully explained to her. Imani. She turned around. He looked the way men look when they are caught and know it. The skin around his eyes tight, his jaw rigid, his hands at his sides in the open position that men use when they are trying to appear non-threatening and failing. He was still holding Nia's flowers. Some of them. He didn't seem to realize it. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Kang Min-jae, who she had watched sit across a table from men who wanted him dead and not blink, was looking at her now with something very close to fear. She found that interesting. Imani, please let me. Don't. I need to explain. I said don't. He closed his mouth. She waited. She was doing the thing she always did in moments of extreme stress, the thing her mother had called going to the still place, a discipline that had nothing meditative about it, more like something structural, like a building's steel frame holding while everything else shook. She breathed. She stood flat on the floor. She kept her hands still. How long? She said. Not a question. An extraction. He looked at the floor, and that look told her more than the answer would, because the answer would come hedged, minimized, shaped to soften impact. The look told her the truth. Min-jae, how long? 14 months. The number landed like something physical. 14 months ago, she and Min-jae had been on a trip to New York. She remembered it clearly. A long weekend in November, a hotel in Midtown, dinner at a restaurant in the West Village that had a 2-month waiting list and was worth every minute of it. She remembered the exact restaurant because she had worn a green dress she'd bought specifically for that dinner, and he told her she looked beautiful, and she had believed him. She had completely and without reservation believed him, and he had already been sleeping with her best friend. Where? She said. What? Where were you? Where were you living? Were you... where? She could not make the question grammatically coherent, and she hated herself for it. There's an apartment. He said we have, and she watched him realize in real time what he'd said and what it revealed. I've been keeping it separate from everything, from us. It wasn't supposed to... Stop. She pressed her fingers to her temple. You have an apartment. Yes. With Nia. He didn't answer. You live with her. Imani, I'm asking you a direct question. You live with Nia Carter, yes or no? He looked at the wall. Yes. She had been expecting it on some cellular level, in the way you can feel a blow coming even when you couldn't have known it was, and still it went through her. She gripped the counter edge behind her. The money, she said. What? The money I lent you, $11,000. Last March, you said it was for the Midtown property deal, the commercial thing. She stopped because she could see from his face exactly where $11,000 had gone. You used my money to set up a life with another woman. That's not... I intended to pay it back. You used my money. I know. My money. I know. His voice cracked slightly on the second one, and she registered that he was not, in this moment, fully in control of himself. And she registered simultaneously that she did not care, and the distance between those two registered facts was the first sign of something changing in her, something settling into alignment like a bone snapping back into its socket, painful, irreversible, clarifying. Get out, she said. Imani, I love you. I need you to know that. What happened? It got out of control. It was never supposed to. Get out of my house, please.
He moved toward her and she took one step back, and something in that step stopped him. "Please don't do this. I know what I did. I know how bad this is, but I—"
"You held her hands," she said, "in my backyard, under my lights, in a suit I picked out for you." She said it quietly, slowly, with the deliberateness of someone who has finally found the exact weight and shape of a thing. "And you're standing in my kitchen right now telling me you love me." He didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. "Leave," she said, "or I call the police." Something moved across his face at the word police. Something fast and reflexive that had nothing to do with the domestic situation and everything to do with who he was and what he did and what police meant in the architecture of his other life. She'd seen that response before, in small doses, and she'd explained it away every time. She didn't explain it away now. He left. She stood in her kitchen and listened to his car start and pull out of her driveway and disappear down the street. Then she went to her bedroom, sat on the edge of her bed, and did something she almost never did. She let herself feel it. Not the betrayal, not yet. That was too large and too structured to approach directly. But the smaller, more immediate things. The sound of wedding music in her own backyard. The flower fallen in the dirt at her gate. The specific image of Min Jae's hands reaching for Naya's, the gesture so practiced and deliberate that it meant they'd rehearsed it, stood in that spot before this day, and rehearsed how they would stand and how they would reach. In her backyard. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She sat like that for a long time. When she got up, she wasn't crying. She hadn't cried. She was aware of this fact in the clinical way you're aware of your own body doing something unexpected. Her eyes were dry, her jaw was tight, and her hands, when she lowered them and looked at them in the dim bedroom light, were absolutely steady. She picked up her phone. She had 37 missed calls, some from numbers she didn't recognize, a few from people she knew, her friend Renata, her colleague Darius, a parent from school who'd somehow heard something already, the way people do, one from her mother, who lived in Charlotte, and who she would call back when she could do so without her voice giving anything away. She scrolled to a contact labeled simply A. She pressed call. It rang once. "Hey, Imani, what's—" "I need your help," she said. "Professional help." "Avery." She paused. "I think someone has been using my name." Silence on the other end. "Give me 4 hours," Avery said. No preamble, no questions, no waste of time. That was who her cousin was. Avery Langston, 37, private investigator out of Decatur with a network that crossed into law enforcement in ways that were never quite official and always absolutely effective. "Where are you?" "Home. Stay there. Don't let anyone in. And Imani—" A pause. "Don't move anything. Don't touch anything you don't need to touch. You understand?" "Yes," she said. She hung up. She sat down at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. She pulled up her banking app. She'd been doing a vague background-level accounting of herself, the way people do when they are busy and basically solvent and not looking for anything wrong, and now she looked directly, with all of her attention. The first thing she saw was a credit inquiry from 6 weeks ago. She hadn't applied for any credit 6 weeks ago. She kept looking. There was another one. Then a transaction from a bank account she didn't recognize but that had her name on it. Imani Renee Brooks, listed as co-account holder on a statement she'd never opened, and a lease she'd never signed, and a utility account that was currently billing an address in Midtown that she had never lived at, but where someone had been paying electricity for 11 months. She sat very still. The lease. She clicked through 3 more screens to get to it, to the image of the document that had been faxed somewhere and scanned and attached to an account in her name. She zoomed in on the signature line, her signature, or something close enough to her signature that it had passed. The I in Imani, the particular loop in the B of Brooks, close enough to her handwriting that whoever had done it had spent time with her actual signature, had studied it, had practiced. She thought about the stack of paperwork she'd signed at Min Jae's request over the past year and a half. Loan applications. He'd called them investment opportunity forms. A property interest agreement she'd signed without reading carefully because he'd sat beside her and explained it in the warm, confident voice of someone who knew what they were doing and needed her trust. She had trusted him. She had signed 6, maybe 7 documents because he'd presented them in ways that made refusal feel like a failure of partnership. She understood now what those documents had been. She put the laptop aside and looked at the wall. After a long moment, she picked up her phone again. She typed a text to Nia Carter. A single word. Don't call me. Then she blocked the number. She picked up her notebook, the small one from her purse, the one where she'd written stable and underlined it twice. And she turned to a blank page and she started writing down everything she could remember. Every document, every amount, every date, every signature. Her handwriting was very even and very controlled, because her mother had made her practice handwriting as a child the way some parents made their children practice instruments, for discipline and for legibility. And she was grateful for it now because what she was writing on that page was the first line of something, the first careful sentence of a case being built against a man who had believed, absolutely, that she would never figure out how to fight him. He didn't know her very well, which she found interesting, given everything. She had been teaching 7th grade for 9 years. Middle school, the age when children are most volatile, most self-deceived, most likely to believe that adults couldn't see through them. She had learned over 9 years that the most dangerous students were not the explosive ones. The explosive ones were easy. You could see them, track them, intervene before the damage was done. The dangerous ones were the ones who were quiet, who cooperated with the surface of things while running an entirely separate operation underneath. She had been that kind of student once. And Minjae had made the mistake, the profound and irreversible mistake, of treating her like one of his business partners, people he managed through information control and selective disclosure, and carefully engineered moments of vulnerability. She wasn't his partner. She was the woman he had borrowed money from while sleeping with her best friend in an apartment they'd furnished with her stolen credit. She picked up her pen and kept writing. Outside, the string lights in the backyard were still on. She didn't get up to turn them off. She would need to see them eventually, would need to go back out there and look at what had happened in her space, her garden, the ground she'd broken and worked and planted herself. But not tonight. Tonight she sat at her kitchen table and wrote down every financial detail she could remember with the focused, meticulous attention of a woman who had been underestimated by people with far more power than Kang Min-jae and had outlasted every one of them. 3 hours and 20 minutes later, Avery's car pulled up in front of the house. Avery Langston was 2 inches shorter than Imani, with close-cropped natural hair and the particular stillness of someone who spent a lot of time watching things before they spoke about them. She came in through the front door, looked at Imani sitting at the kitchen table with her notebook and her cold cup of coffee, and sat down across from her without saying anything for a moment. Then, "Show me." Imani turned the laptop around. Avery looked at the screen for a long time. She scrolled. She clicked. She did not make any sounds of surprise because Avery rarely made sounds of surprise. She dealt in information for a living and had trained herself to receive it without reaction, which Imani had always found both impressive and slightly unnerving. She pulled out her own phone, took photos of specific screens. "How many documents do you think you signed?" she asked. "I wrote down everything I remember, at least 6, maybe 8. "Over what time period?" 18 months? Maybe more." Avery looked at her. "Imani, I know. This isn't just infidelity. I know. What he's done with these accounts, if what I'm seeing is what I think it is, this is identity fraud, financial fraud. This is federal territory depending on how the accounts were structured." "I know," Imani said. Avery was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" Imani looked at her notebook. At the even lines of her own handwriting, every detail she remembered laid out in sequence, beginning with the first document and ending with what she'd found tonight. 18 months of her life, compressed to 2 pages of careful script. "I want to know everything," she said. "Before I do anything, I want to know the full picture. I want numbers, account numbers, amounts, dates. I want everything attached to my name that I didn't authorize." "I can have the financial picture in 48 hours, Avery said. "The rest, the criminal side. I've got a contact at the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Nothing official until you're ready, but he can tell me what we're looking at." "Do it." Avery nodded, started to stand. "Avery?" Imani looked up. "He's not just a businessman. You know that, right?" A pause. "I've suspected it. I need you to be careful, not afraid, just careful." Her cousin looked at her steadily. "He should be the one who's careful," she said. After Avery left, Imani sat alone at her kitchen table. The house was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car went past. The clock on the microwave read 11:23 p.m. Her phone lit up with a message from a number she didn't immediately recognize, and then she did. It was Nia's second number, the one she used for business calls, the one Amani knew about because they'd been best friends for 12 years, and she knew most of Nia's numbers the way she knew most of Nia's fears and habits and weaknesses. Amani, please. I know you won't believe this, but I'm sorry. I need to explain, please. She looked at the message for a long time. She put the phone face down on the table. She went to bed. She did not sleep, not really. She drifted in and out of something that felt like sleep's outline, hovering at the surface, her mind running calculations she couldn't stop. 14 months. An apartment. 8 documents. Her own name on accounts she'd never opened. And underneath all of it, persistent as a splinter, the image of those hands reaching across the garden, the practiced ease of it, the way it looked like something that had been real for a long time. How many dinners had she cooked while they were doing this? How many times had she sat across from Nia at a restaurant and laughed and shared and confided? How many times had Minjae held her while he was holding 2 lives simultaneously and finding it manageable? She pressed her face into the pillow. She thought, I am going to need to be smarter than both of them. Not angrier, not louder, smarter. Because rage was understandable, but it was also traceable. It left marks. It made you sloppy. She had watched her mother be angry once, really devastatingly angry, at Imani's father when Imani was 11. And she had watched how that anger had been turned against her mother in every room where they had to be in the same space. Anger was a gift to the person who'd hurt you. She turned onto her back and stared at the ceiling. Smarter, she thought again. And then, underneath that thought, quieter and more fundamental, the thought that would drive every decision she made for the next several weeks. He built this on the assumption that I would never look. She closed her eyes. He was wrong. In the morning, before she'd even made coffee, her phone rang with a number she recognized. Nia. Not the second number this time. The main one. The number Amani had saved under Nia BFF for 9 years. A label she'd never changed because you didn't think to change things like that when you trusted someone. You just let them accumulate. She stared at it ring. On the 4th ring, she answered, Imani. Nia's voice was raw, the particular texture of someone who hadn't slept and had been crying. Please, I know there's nothing I can say, but I need you to understand that it wasn't planned from the beginning. It happened, and then it got out of control and I tried to end it. And when was the wedding supposed to happen? Imani asked. Silence. Nia. Harder now. When was it planned for? Because you were using my backyard, my lights, my garden. On a day when everyone thought I was going to be in Savannah until Sunday. So I want to know, how long has this been planned? The silence stretched. And in that silence, Imani heard something. A quality of hesitation that had a specific shape. It was the hesitation of someone who had realized, too late, that they were about to answer a question that revealed more than they'd intended. Nia, she said, I need you to tell me right now. Did everyone there know I was supposed to be gone? And Nia, crying and sorry and unraveling, made the mistake that changed everything. She told the truth. The truth came out the way it always does. Sideways, through a crack that wasn't supposed to be there. Everyone knew you were supposed to be gone until Sunday, Nia said, and then she stopped. And the stopping was the sound of someone who had just walked off a ledge and was still falling and hadn't hit the ground yet. Imani sat very still on the edge of her bed. Say that again, she said. Imani, I need you to say exactly what you just said. Again. I didn't mean it like Nia. Her voice was so quiet it was almost nothing. You just told me everyone knew I was supposed to be gone, which means everyone there yesterday knew the plan, which means everyone knew about the 2 of you, and everyone knew it was my backyard. She paused. And nobody called me. The crying on the other end changed register, became something smaller, more cornered. How long, Imani said, has the wedding been planned? Silence. I'm going to find out either way. I want to hear it from you. 3 months, Nia whispered. 3 months. Imani pressed her free hand flat against the mattress. 3 months of planning,
3 months of venue decisions. Her own backyard, the backyard she'd described to Nia in detail after she'd spent that whole Saturday in May stringing lights, texting Nia photos of the progress, saying, "Look how good it looks. You have to come see it." 3 months of Nia looking at those photos and thinking, "That's where I want to do it." 3 months of Minjae agreeing. 3 months of other people receiving invitations with a date that corresponded exactly with a weekend when Amani had already told Minjae she'd be away. "You planned it around my trip," Amani said. We just knew you'd be." "You planned it around my trip to Savannah that I told Minjae about, that you knew about because I told you too." A pause. "Did you know about the accounts, Nia?" "My accounts. The ones in my name." The silence that followed was a different kind, denser. "Did you know?" Amani repeated. "I didn't know the details." "That's not what I asked. I knew he was handling some financial things. He said you were involved, that I was involved." Amani stood up from the bed and walked to the window. Dawn was coming, gray and indifferent over the rooftops of her street, and she looked at it and felt nothing that resembled what she would have expected to feel. No collapse, no dissolution, just a cold and clarifying rage that was still in the process of organizing itself into something useful. "He told you I was a part of it, and you believed him." "I wanted to believe him, because it was easier. Amani, I don't want to know what you were." She cut it off clean. "I want to know one more thing. The apartment. Did he tell you how he paid for it?" Silence. "Nia." "He said he had investors." "He had one investor," Amani said. "Me. $11,000 that I thought was going into a commercial property deal. It went into an apartment where you've been living with my boyfriend for 14 months. She waited one beat. "I want you to understand that I'm not telling you this because I want you to feel bad. I'm telling you because you're going to be asked about it under oath. And I want you to think carefully about whether you want to keep protecting a man who used both of us." She hung up. She stood at the window for another moment. Then she went to the kitchen and made coffee and drank it standing over the sink because she could not yet sit in her kitchen and feel comfortable. The kitchen still carried yesterday's air, the smell of someone else's morning. She had a lot to do. She started by showering because she'd learned early that clarity lived closer to the surface when the body was clean and fed. She stood under hot water until the bathroom was thick with steam, and then she got out and dressed in the most ordinary thing she owned: jeans, a plain gray shirt, sneakers, because she was not going to perform grief today. She was not going to wear it on the outside where it could be read and assessed and used. By 8:15, she was back at her kitchen table with her notebook and her laptop and a list she'd started building in her head while she showered. By 9:30, Avery called. "How fast can you get to my office?" Avery said. 30 minutes. "Make it 25. Avery's office was in a converted Victorian Indicator that she shared with 2 other investigators and a paralegal named Joyce, who was older than everyone and kept the whole operation from flying apart. Amani had been there maybe 4 times over the years. She walked in and Joyce looked up from her desk and said, "Coffee's fresh," in the tone of a woman who had seen enough trouble walk through that door that she wasn't going to waste energy on shock. Avery was in the back room with 3 screens going and a legal pad covered in numbers. "Sit down," she said. Amani sat. "Okay." Avery turned one of the screens toward her. "In 48 hours, I told you. I said 48 hours. She shook her head. "Didn't need 48 hours. This isn't complicated to find, Amani. That's the first thing I want you to understand. Whoever set this up, and we both know who, didn't take significant steps to hide it. He took steps to make sure you didn't look. Those are different things. Show me." 3 credit accounts in your name. 1 opened 14 months ago, 2 opened in the last 6. Combined available credit of $62,000. Current balance on all 3, she pointed at a figure, $38,000 and change. Most of the charges are consistent with apartment furnishing, high-end stuff. Some of it looks like travel. There are charges from hotels in Miami, Chicago, one in Honolulu. Imani looked at the screen. $38,000 on cards she'd never applied for. Buying furniture for an apartment she'd never seen, funding trips she hadn't taken. "The signature on the original applications," she said. "Scanned copies right here." Avery pulled up another window. "It's good. Someone who knows your handwriting well. But it's not perfect.
See the K in Brooks? Your K has a specific break. The upper and lower strokes don't connect. On these applications, they do. Small thing, easy to miss, but a forensic document examiner will clock it immediately. He had access to my signature because I signed actual things for him. Right, he had originals to work from. Avery leaned back. The lease on the Midtown apartment is the centerpiece. It's in both names, his and yours, which means on paper, you co-signed on a luxury apartment you've never been in. For how long? 13 months. Renewed once, 3 months ago. Amani put her hands flat on the table. The utility accounts list you as primary account holder. The parking garage downstairs has your name on the residential permit. Avery paused. Amani, there's one more thing. Tell me. There's a small business account, LLC, registered in your name 6 months ago. Amani Brooks Consulting, operating out of the Midtown address. She went completely still. I don't own a business. On paper you do. The LLC has had 3 invoices processed through it in the last 6 months. Client names are shell entities. I'm still pulling those threads, but the dollar amounts are significant. We're talking about $45,000 in invoiced revenue that passed through an account in your name and then was distributed to 2 other accounts. Where did the money go? One account I can trace. It's a holding account that's connected to several of Min Jae's known business entities. The other I haven't found yet. Amani sat with that for a moment. The numbers were getting large. The structure was getting complex. This wasn't something a man did accidentally or in the heat of passion. This was built. Carefully, incrementally, with the patience of someone who believed he had unlimited time because he had complete control over what the other person could see. He used me as a vehicle, she said. Yes. For money movement. That's what it looks like. Which means this might not just be fraud, this might be connected to his other operations. Avery said it carefully. Yes. My contact at the Financial Crimes Unit, he's not officially involved, this is purely informal at this point, but I described the structure to him without names, and he said the LLC invoice pattern is consistent with money laundering methodology. Specifically, service-based businesses are commonly used because the revenue is difficult to verify. Imani breathed out slowly. So he used my name to clean money? Possibly. We need more evidence before we can say that definitively, but the structure exists. Avery looked at her directly. Which changes what you're dealing with. This isn't just a cheating boyfriend who forged a few signatures. If there's laundering involved, that pulls in federal jurisdiction. And it means Min Jae has a very strong incentive to make this problem disappear before it gets to that level. Does that mean I'm in danger? Avery was quiet for a moment too long. I don't think so, she said. Not yet. Because he doesn't know how much you know. As of yesterday, you walked in on a wedding. He knows you found the apartment information. He has to assume that from your conversation. But he doesn't know we've pulled the accounts. He doesn't know about the LLC. He'll figure out quickly that I'm not just sitting at home crying. How quickly? He knows me, Imani said flatly, or he thinks he does. He might underestimate how fast, but he won't underestimate the direction. She paused. I want to file. I want to start the criminal complaint process today. Imani, I'd recommend waiting. I want it on record. I want it official. Even if we're still building the picture, I want a record that says I reported this today, not next week. Today. Avery looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded. Okay, I'll set up the call with my contact. We go informal first. You tell him what you know. He tells you how to build the case. No official report until you're ready, but it creates a timestamp. Today, Imani said. Today, Avery agreed. The call happened at noon in Avery's back office, on a secured line that Avery used for sensitive conversations. The contact's name was Reeves. He didn't offer a first name and Imani didn't ask. He had the careful, uninflected voice of someone who had spent a career receiving information without reacting to it. He asked precise questions, and she answered them precisely, and when she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Ms. Brooks, he said, are you willing to provide documentation? I have everything I can access digitally. Physical documents, the ones I actually signed. Those are wherever Min Jae keeps them. We can work with digital first. Are you aware of Mr. Kang's other business activities? Imani looked at Avery. Avery gave her a small nod. I know what he presents publicly, Imani said,
I've always had reason to think there was something else. I don't have specifics.
That's actually useful, Reeves said. The fact that the accounts are structured the way they are and that you were kept uninformed positions you clearly as a victim. That's important for how this moves forward. A pause. I want to be honest with you. If what your investigator described is what it appears to be,
this is larger than a personal fraud case. There may be interests here that are beyond what a local complaint can address. Are you prepared for that?
she thought about Min Jae's face last night, the fear she'd seen there and how new it was, and how it told her that in 4 years she had never truly been looking at someone afraid. She'd been looking at someone performing approximations of every emotion while the real architecture of his life operated behind it. Yes, she said. After the call, she sat in Avery's office for a few minutes without speaking. Avery gave her the space, busied herself with the legal pad. Then Amani's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Min Jae. She held the phone until it stopped. He called again 30 seconds later. She declined it. A text came through 30 seconds after that. We need to talk, not about us, about something else. There's something you need to know before this goes further. Please call me back. She read it twice, showed it to Avery. Avery read it. He knows you're moving. He's trying to get in front of it. He might also be trying to find out what you have. I know. She put the phone in her pocket. Let him wonder. She drove home in the early afternoon. The street was quiet. Her house was exactly as she'd left it, which shouldn't have surprised her, but did, slightly. She'd half expected something to be different, some physical manifestation of how different everything was. The house looked ordinary. It looked like a house where nothing had happened. She went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and made herself eat something. Eggs, fast, barely seasoned, the cooking of someone going through the necessary motions of maintenance. She ate standing over the stove because the kitchen still felt occupied, and she wasn't ready to take up space in it normally. She was washing the pan when she heard the knock. Front door, 3 sharp raps. The knock of someone who'd decided on the way over that they were going to be heard. She dried her hands. She went to the door and opened it. Nia Carter stood on her front porch in a sundress and flat sandals, eyes swollen from a night of crying, hair pulled back in a way that looked hastily assembled. She was holding her own arms across her chest, a posture Amani recognized from 23 years of knowing this woman. It was what Nia did when she was terrified and trying to look smaller. They looked at each other. I told you not to call me, Amani said. I know. That applied to showing up here too. I know. Nia's voice cracked immediately. Imani, I can't do this over the phone. I need to say this to your face. I don't need to hear it. Please. Imani looked at her. The rational part of her brain, the part that Avery had activated this morning, the part running the case, said close the door. But something else, older and more complicated, the 12-year sediment of a friendship, said look at her, see her, not for her sake, for yours. She stepped back and let Nia in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Amani had sat last night writing down every detail in her small, careful handwriting, and the wrongness of Nia being at that table was physical. Amani felt it in her shoulders, a stiffening that didn't go away. Nia talked. She talked for a long time. She talked about how it started. A night when Min Jae had come looking for Imani, but Imani wasn't there, and Nia was. And how she'd told herself it wasn't going to be anything, and then it was something, and then it was more. And she'd tried to stop it 3 times and hadn't managed to stop it once. She talked about the guilt. She talked about the way she'd avoided being alone with Imani because she couldn't hold the guilt and her face at the same time. She talked about Min Jae convincing her that it was going to end, that he was going to end things with Imani first, that the timing just wasn't right. Imani listened to all of it without interrupting. When Nia finally stopped, Imani looked at the table for a moment. Nia, she said, you've been my best friend since we were 19. You were in the room when my mother was sick. You were the first person I called when I got the teaching job. She stopped. And for 14 months, you have been sleeping in a bed that was partially paid for by money I lent the man you were sleeping with. Nia started crying. I don't want to hear about guilt, Imani said, because guilt would have stopped you. Guilt would have made you call me at month 2 and say, Imani, there's something you need to know. What you had wasn't guilt. What you had was discomfort. And you managed the discomfort by telling yourself a story where what you were doing was complicated and hard instead of what it actually was.
I know. What did you think was going to happen? Amani looked at her directly now. Did you think you were going to get married in my backyard and then just… What? Never tell me? Was I going to keep being your best friend from a distance while you lived the life you built on my credit? He said… Nia stopped. He said what?
Nia looked at the table. He said you'd eventually move on. He said you were strong and you'd be fine. He made it sound like you were already pulling away anyway, that you weren't really committed. Amani felt something move through her chest. Not pain exactly, but the close relative of it, the sensation of a gap appearing where something solid used to be. He told you I wasn't committed, she said. He said you seemed disconnected lately, and you believed him. Nia said nothing. Because it was convenient to believe him, Amani said, not loudly. The quieter she got, the more space her words took up. Because if I was already pulling away, then what you were doing was almost kind. Is that right? You were almost doing me a favor. No, that's not… How long have you wanted what I have, Nia? The question landed and sat there. Nia's face went through three things in rapid succession. Denial, something cracking underneath the denial, and then the raw, unprotected thing underneath that. That's not what this is, she said, but her voice had lost its footing. Your words, remember? Amani said, not mine. I didn't say anything. I'm asking. Nia pressed her hands over her mouth. When she took them away, she looked like someone who had been holding their face together by force and just ran out of strength. I don't know when it started, she said. I looked at your life and I saw everything I wanted, and I told myself that wasn't why, that it was real with him, that's enough, Amani said. She stood up. I need you to leave now. Amani. I'm not angry at you, Nia. She said it the way you say a true thing that doesn't help anyone feel better. I'm something worse than angry. I'm done. Those are different. She walked to the front door and opened it. And when Avery's investigation is complete, and when the financial fraud case moves forward, you're going to be contacted. I'd recommend getting a lawyer before that happens. Whatever Minji told you about those accounts, you're going to need to be able to prove what you knew and what you didn't. Nia stood up slowly. You're going after him legally. I'm going after my name legally, Amani said. My credit, my identity, my money. Those things have my name on them. I'm getting them back. Nia stopped in the doorway. She looked at Amani with the expression of someone who is seeing a person clearly for the first time and doesn't know what to do with what they're seeing. He's not going to let this go quietly. I know. He has people, Amani. You know what I mean. I know what he has, Amani said. I watched him for 4 years. I saw things I explained away. I signed things I didn't read. She looked at Nia steadily. He built this because he counted on me not looking. That was always his one real mistake. Nia left. Amani closed the door and stood in the quiet hallway of her own house. She breathed in once, slow. Then she went back to the kitchen table, opened her notebook, and kept building the case. That evening, Avery called with something new. Her voice had that tight, controlled quality that Imani had learned meant significant information. The second account, Avery said, the one I couldn't trace this morning, I found it. Whose is it? A pause. It's in Nia's name, Avery said. She's been receiving payments from the LLC, 14 months regular transfers, not large individually, $1,500 a month, but it adds up. Amani sat very still. $21,000. Nia had received $21,000 from a company operating under Amani's name. She told me she didn't know the details, Amani said. She knew enough to provide a bank account, Avery said. The room felt different. Not the room. Everything felt different. The whole texture of the past 14 months, which had been bad enough when it was passion and betrayal and the predictable wreckage of desire, but was something else entirely now. Something colder. Something that had required cooperation, planning, sustained and deliberate choice. Avery, she said. Yeah. File everything. I'm ready. The line was quiet for a moment. Once we do this, Avery said, it starts moving. You understand? This won't stay quiet. Min-jae will know within days, maybe hours. I know. And his people, I know. Imani pressed the phone against her ear. File it. Avery exhaled. Okay, I'll have it submitted to the federal contact by morning. Imani... She stopped. What? My contact mentioned something else. Off the record, he said that Min-jae's organization has been on a watch list for 18 months. They've been building something larger, and they were waiting on a specific piece of financial documentation to move forward. A pause. The LLC. The one in your name. He thinks it might be the piece they needed. Imani closed her eyes. She'd been used as the key, not just as a cover, as the actual mechanism. The documentation that a federal investigation had been waiting for, the missing link in a financial chain, had been sitting in her name for 6 months while she stood in front of a classroom teaching children how to read and had no idea. Does that put me at risk? She asked. It complicates things, Avery said carefully. It means we need to move carefully. Controlled. We can't just file and step back. We need to stay in communication with Reeves, make sure the federal piece knows you're cooperative and we're victimized, not complicit. Yes, she sat with that word in the silent kitchen. Complicit. A word that meant something very specific in the law and something broader in the mouth of a man who had used her carefully for over a year and would now, when cornered, reframe everything to protect himself. She thought about Min-jae's text. There's something you need to know before this goes further. She understood now what he'd meant. He'd known. Maybe not the full picture, maybe not the federal dimension, but he'd known that what he'd built with her name was about to become a liability. He'd wanted to get in front of it, to reach her before the evidence was formalized, to reframe it, to offer something in exchange for her silence, to make her an offer that required her to be afraid. He'd miscalculated, and he'd keep miscalculating, because the version of Imani he knew was the version she had been comfortable showing him. Warm, trusting, inclined toward care. That woman existed, but she wasn't. That woman existed, but she wasn't all of what Imani was. She put the phone down and sat in the kitchen until the light outside went fully dark, and she did not turn on the lamp, and she did not move from the chair. She sat in the dark, and she let herself feel the full dimension of it, not just what had been done, but the architecture of it, the precision required to do it. You didn't build something like this in a moment of weakness or passion. You built it with intention, with patience, with the specific coldness of someone who looked at another person and saw utility. He had looked at her and seen a signature. That was what she kept coming back to. 4 years. 4 years of dinners and weekends and small domestic intimacies. The way he took his coffee, the specific spot on his left shoulder she'd learned to press when he was tense, the sound of him moving through her house in the early morning. And underneath all of it, running parallel, he had looked at her name and seen a tool. She got up and turned on the kitchen light and went to bed. She did not sleep well, but she slept. By 7 the next morning, Avery had submitted the documentation package to Reeves. By 7:15, Imani's phone had 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize and 1 from Min-jae. By 8, she was dressed and eating toast she didn't taste and reading through the email Avery had forwarded. A summary of everything submitted, everything documented, everything now officially part of a federal inquiry that had a file number and a timestamp and her name attached to it as victim, not participant. That word again. Victim. She was trying to make peace with it. At 8:40, Min-jae showed up at her door. She saw him through the peephole before she opened it, standing on her porch in a dark jacket, no tie, which was unusual for him. His hands were in his pockets. His jaw was set. He was doing the thing he did when he was controlling something internal, the stillness that she'd always read as composure and was only now recalibrating as suppression. She opened the door. He looked at her. Something moved in his expression when he saw her face. She didn't know what it was, whether it was the sight of her without any performance of softness, or whether it was something he'd been told, some information that had reached him. "We need to talk," he said. "You said that last night. I mean it differently this morning." She stepped back and let him in, not because she trusted him, because she wanted to see what he'd been sent here to do. He followed her to the kitchen. He didn't sit down, stood on the other side of the table with his hands still in his pockets, and she stood at the counter with her arms crossed, and they looked at each other across the table's width. The way two people look at each other when the ordinary geography of a relationship has been cleared away and what's left is just the structure underneath. "I know you've been talking to someone," he said. "Have I? I know you've pulled financial records. I know you have. Someone working on your behalf." He paused. "I'm not here to fight you, Imani. I'm here because I need you to understand what you're walking into. Tell me." "The accounts, the LLC." He stopped. "There are things connected to those that go beyond beyond us, beyond what happened between us." He exhaled, controlled. "If you push this, if this goes into federal channels, it doesn't just come down on me. It comes down on a structure that has people in it who are not going to tolerate exposure, people who don't negotiate." She looked at him steadily. "Are you threatening me?" "No." And the way he said it, fast, sharp, with something she didn't expect in it, sounded almost like the truth. "I'm warning you, there's a difference. From where I'm standing, the difference is small. Imani." He pulled one hand out of his pocket and set it flat on the table. "I made a mistake. Many mistakes. I know what I did and I know what I took from you, and I'm not going to stand here and ask you to forgive any of it. But I need you to know that the LLC, the financial structure, that isn't just mine. There are partners, silent partners. And if federal investigators start pulling that thread, those partners are going to look for where the exposure came from. And you think it came from me. They'll think it came from you because it's your name on it." She held very still. "You put my name on something that could make other people want to hurt me," she said slowly. "And now you're standing in my kitchen telling me to back off, to protect myself. From the thing you built." He didn't flinch from it. She'd give him that. "Yes," he said. "Get out," she said. "Imani, I heard what you came to say. Now get out of my house." He left. She stood at the kitchen counter and pressed both hands flat on the granite and breathed through her nose. Once, twice, she was not going to shake. She was not going to let the warning land the way it was designed to land, in the soft tissue of her fear spreading. She called Avery. "He just left," she said. "What did he say?" She told her. All of it, word for word, the way she'd trained herself to relay information, clean, sequential, without editorializing. Avery was quiet for a moment. "He told you there are other parties connected to the LLC." His words were silent partners. That tracks with what Reeves suggested. "This is bigger than Min Jae." Another pause. "Imani, Reeves needs to know about this conversation. That Min Jae came to your home and issued what amounts to a veiled threat. That's important. That's actually very useful." "Why useful?" "Because it means he's scared enough to come to you himself instead of just waiting. That's not someone in control of the situation. That's someone who's running out of options." She processed that. "Call Reeves. Tell him everything." Already pulling up his contact, Imani... A pause. "Don't open the door for Min Jae again. Whatever he tells you he wants to say." "I know." She hung up and refilled her coffee cup and stood at the window looking out at the front street. A woman she recognized from 2 houses down was walking a dog. The mail truck was making its way slowly up the block. The world was doing what the world always did, proceeding with complete indifference to the fact that her entire life had been structurally compromised. She drank her coffee. She was still at the window when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Not Min Jae's, not anyone in her contacts. She answered it because Avery had told her to document everything, and that meant answering things you didn't recognize. Ms. Brooks. A woman's voice, formal, measured, with the particular cadence of someone who chose each word with professional care. "My name is Sandra Vale. I'm an attorney. I've been retained by parties connected to certain business arrangements that I believe intersect with your current situation." Imani set her coffee down. "What parties?" "I'm not at liberty to disclose the clients, but I've been asked to reach out to you directly because my clients believe there's been a misrepresentation, that you've been misled about your role in certain financial instruments, and they want you to know that they have no interest in any legal exposure attaching to you personally." "Why are you calling me instead of my attorney?" A brief pause. "You have retained an attorney." "I have representation," Imani said. It was technically true. Avery operated closely enough with legal counsel that it functioned as representation. Anything further should go through them. Of course, I just wanted to personally assure you that my clients have no— Who retained you? Amani said. Not the clients. I know you can't tell me that, but I want to know who made the call this morning that ended with you dialing my number. Silence. Was it Minjae, she said, or was it one of the silent partners? The pause that followed was exactly long enough to answer the question without answering it. I'll route all further communication through your representative, Sandra Vale said, and hung up. Amani stared at her phone. Someone had moved faster than Minjae. Someone above him in the structure had decided to try a different approach. Not a personal conversation, but a legal contact. An attorney with plausible deniability. A voice that said, "We're not threatening you. We just want to make sure you understand your position," which was a threat in a suit. She texted Avery the attorney's name and number and the full content of the call. Avery's response came back in under 2 minutes. Sandra Vale is a corporate attorney, high-end clients. She doesn't do domestic fraud work. That call was from someone bigger than Minjae. Stay home today. I mean it. She stayed home. She graded papers in the afternoon. She had a stack of reading comprehension tests that had been waiting for 3 days, and her students needed them back. And she sat at the kitchen table with a red pen and a rubric, and she graded them methodically, one by one, because she was still a teacher, and her students still had a test, and ordinary things still required her attention, even when everything else was burning. She was midway through the stack when she heard her phone buzz with a notification. She looked at it. Nia Carter had posted to Instagram. The post was 3 photos. The first was the backyard, her backyard, lit by her string lights, the rose garden visible in the soft gold, the chairs arranged in their rows. The second was Nia in the white dress, face turned slightly, the ranunculus in her locks, expression arranged into something theatrical and beautiful. The third was Minjae and Nia together, his hand on her waist, both of them looking at the camera with the careful, curated contentment of people who had decided this moment was the one they wanted documented. The caption read, "We did it our way. No apologies." Amani put the phone down. She picked up her red pen. She kept grading, but her hand was not steady for the next 4 minutes. She felt it. The tremor, slight, controlled, a physiological response she couldn't suppress because she was human, and she'd been trying to hold too many things for 4 days, and her body had its own timeline. She set the pen down and pressed her hand flat on the table until the tremor passed. She breathed. She picked the pen back up. She finished the stack. By that evening, the post had been shared 47 times. Most of the shares were people who recognized the backyard. Her neighbors, her colleagues, parents of her students, people in the Atlanta social fabric who knew her house, who had been to gatherings there, who sent her messages that ranged from stunned to furious on her behalf. 3 people tagged her in the comments before Nia deleted the tag function. Someone who had been at the wedding, one of the people whose face Amani had recognized in the guest rows, posted a comment that said simply, "This is Amani Brooks's yard," and let it sit there. The comment got 46 likes before Nia deleted it. Then she made the post private. Then she deleted it entirely. But the screenshots were already out. Avery called at 9:15 that evening, and Amani could hear something different in her voice. Not the controlled professional register of the past 2 days, but something with an edge in it, a tension that Avery didn't usually let through. "Reeves moved faster than I expected," she said. "Amani, the federal piece, it's not informal anymore. They've upgraded the inquiry. The LLC documentation triggered something they already had open. This is now an active investigation." "How active?" "Active enough that I got a call from Reeves directly, not through the usual channels. He wants to meet with you, in person, with a federal attorney present." Amani set down the glass of water she'd been holding. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock." "Where?" "Downtown. Federal building on Spring Street." Avery paused. "Amani, this is beyond what I usually operate in. I need you to understand that. Whatever I've been doing for you these past 2 days, this is a different category now." "Are you telling me you're stepping back?" "No, I'm telling you that tomorrow morning you're going to need an actual attorney in the room. I've already called someone. Marcus Webb,
You don't know him, but I do. He's the best white-collar defense attorney in Atlanta who also does victim representation. He's agreed to be there. Defense attorney?
Victim with your name on financial instruments used in what may be organized criminal activity. You need defense framing even as a victim because the prosecution side will want to establish clean separation and your attorney needs to make sure that separation is iron. A pause. This is manageable, Imani, but it requires the right room with the right people. Okay, she said. Okay? I said okay, 9 o'clock, I'll be there. After she hung up, she sat with the quiet house and the glow of the kitchen light and the stack of graded papers still on the table. And she thought about her 7th graders who would pick those tests up on Monday morning and who had no idea their teacher had spent the week discovering that her identity had been borrowed for purposes she hadn't agreed to by people she had loved. She thought about Naya posting those photos. No apologies. She thought about Minjae standing in her kitchen that morning with his hand flat on the table saying they'll think it came from you. The specific construction of it, the they, the distance he'd created between himself and the threat by naming it as someone else's. A man who was already building the story he'd tell about this later, positioning himself as the one who had warned her, the one who had tried to protect her, the one who was also a victim of structures larger than himself. She was not going to let him have that story. She went to her bedroom and got out the formal blazer she wore for parent-teacher conferences. Dark blue, well-fitted, the one that made her look like exactly what she was, which was a woman who took things seriously and expected to be taken seriously in return. She hung it on the back of the chair by her dresser. She set her alarm for 6. She was almost asleep when her phone lit up one more time. Not a call. A text. From Minjae. And the text was longer than anything he'd sent her before, and something about the length of it made her sit up in the dark and read it. I know you're going to do what you're going to do, and I'm not going to try to stop you anymore. But there is one thing you don't know, and you need to know it before tomorrow. The LLC. There's a 3rd account attached to it that Avery won't have found yet because it's not in the normal banking infrastructure. It's in a name you're going to recognize. And when you walk into that federal building tomorrow and they show you the full picture, I need you to be prepared for what you're going to see. It's not going to be what you think it is. Call me. Just once. Please. She read it 3 times. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. The 3rd account. A name she would recognize. He'd been careful. He hadn't said whose name, hadn't given her enough to act on without calling him, which was the design of it, the hook in it. He needed her to call. He needed one more conversation before the federal meeting, one more chance to shape what she knew and how she knew it. She wasn't going to give it to him, but she lay awake for another hour anyway, because the text had done what it was designed to do. Put a question in her mind that she couldn't answer without him, and she hated that it was working, hated the specific impotence of knowing you were being played and still feeling the pull of it. At 6 in the morning, she got up and showered and put on the dark blue blazer and drove to the federal building. Marcus Webb was already there when she arrived. Early 50s, compact, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades reading rooms before entering them. He shook her hand and said, "I've reviewed what Avery sent me. You're in a better position than you might think." And she liked him immediately for not pretending the position was comfortable. Reeves was not what she'd expected. She'd built him in her mind as something more imposing, but the man who met them in the conference room on the 4th floor was unremarkable in the particular way that federal investigators sometimes were. Medium height, dark suit, close-cut graying hair. The manner of someone who had made himself invisible as a professional discipline. He introduced himself as Special Agent David Reeves and shook her hand and directed her to a seat. There were 2 other people in the room, a federal attorney named Chen who handled victim coordination, and a woman whose name was given only as Specialist Hart, who had documents in front of her that she didn't show Imani yet. They went through procedure first. Marcus confirmed her status. Chen explained the parameters of the conversation. Imani sat at the table in her dark blue blazer and answered preliminary questions and was steady and precise because she had been preparing for this in one form or another since she'd sat down at her kitchen table 4 nights ago and written the first line in her notebook. Then Specialist Hart opened the folder. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "I want to show you the complete financial structure as we've mapped it. The LLC at the center, the accounts we've identified,
and the flow of funds. She laid a single-page diagram on the table and pushed it across. Amani looked at it. The LLC was at the center. Lines ran outward to accounts. She recognized the ones Avery had found, the credit accounts, the Midtown Utilities, the lease. There was Minjay's holding account. There was Nia's account, the one receiving the $1,500 a month transfers. And then there was a third account.
On the far right of the diagram, connected to the LLC by a line with a different weight, heavier, indicating higher volume, was a third account, and beside it in the diagram's notation system was a name. She looked at the name. She read it twice. She felt the room shift. Not the room. Herself. Something inside her, some structural element she hadn't known was load-bearing until she felt it give way. Her face was still arranged correctly. Her hands were flat on the table. But somewhere below the surface, at the level where the self actually lives, something cracked. The name on the third account was Avery Langston, her cousin, her investigator, the person who had been in this building yesterday, the person who had called Reeves, the person who had moved this investigation forward, who had directed every step she'd taken, who had told her what to file and when and through whom. "Ms. Brooks," Reeves said carefully, "can you tell us about your relationship with Avery Langston?" She sat very still. 18 months. He'd said the LLC had been operating for 6 months, but the watch list on Minjay's organization, Reeves had mentioned 18 months. The length of time they'd been building toward this. The length of time someone inside the structure had been providing information, moving pieces, ensuring the case developed in a particular direction. She thought about Avery saying, "This isn't complicated to find, Amani. He took steps to make sure you didn't look." She thought about how quickly Avery had found everything, how precisely, how Avery had known which contact to call, which channels to use, how to position Amani as victim rather than participant, how smoothly every door had opened. You didn't get that fast from talent. You got that fast from already knowing where everything was. "Ms. Brooks," Reeves said again. She looked at him, and then she looked at the diagram again, at the line running between the LLC and her cousin's name. The account that had been receiving payments for 14 months, longer than Nia, larger than Nia, consistent and quiet and invisible, because Avery, of all people, knew exactly how to hide. Amani sat at that table and the room was very quiet, and Reeves was watching her with the particular patience of someone who had delivered information like this before and knew how long it took to land completely. The federal attorney Chen had her pen set down. Specialist Hart had her hands folded. Everyone in the room was waiting for Amani to fall apart, or to deny it, or to do the thing people did when the last solid thing gave way beneath them. She didn't do any of those things. She looked at the diagram for another 4 seconds, counted them, let the information finish arriving. Then she said, "How long have you known?" Reeves said, "We identified the account 8 days ago." 8 days ago. She kept her voice level. "Before I came to you." "Yes." "So when Avery contacted you through what she described as an informal channel, we were already aware of Miss Langston's involvement." "Yes." Marcus put his hand briefly on the table near hers. Not touching, just proximity. The attorney's version of a steadying gesture. She was aware of it and grateful for it and did not look at him. "The informal contact," she said, "when Avery called you and described the structure without names, was that a setup?" Reeves considered his words. "We allowed the contact to develop because we believe Ms. Langston was bringing you to us voluntarily and that your cooperation would be—" "Was it a setup?" she said again, harder. "We used the contact to gather information about what Miss Langston was willing to disclose," he said, "and what she wasn't." "What wasn't she willing to disclose?" He gestured at the diagram. The line between the LLC and Avery's account. Her own involvement. Imani breathed out through her nose. She looked at the ceiling for one moment, one controlled, deliberate moment. And then she looked back at the diagram and began the process of rebuilding her understanding of the past 4 days from the ground up. Avery had called her. Avery had come to her house. Avery had taken photographs of the financial screens. Avery had directed her to file. Avery had introduced her to Marcus, who was sitting beside her right now, and Imani looked at Marcus and said, "Did you know?" Marcus met her eyes. "I was told there was a complexity in the case I'd be brought up to speed on when we arrived. I didn't know the specific nature until this morning. But you knew there was something. Yes, she filed that. Filed it and kept moving because she couldn't stop here. Couldn't afford to let the betrayal of any single thing become the event she was living in. She had to keep thinking. What does Avery's involvement actually mean, she said. Legally, for me. Chen spoke for the first time. Your position as victim is unchanged. The account in Ms. Langston's name doesn't alter your status. You didn't authorize any of this, and we have documentation establishing that. But it does complicate the narrative of how you came to us, and it raises questions about what information may have been managed or shaped before it reached us. Managed, Imani said. You mean she brought me here in a specific direction? We believe she was attempting to control the exposure, to position herself on the right side of it before we moved. To use me as her own cover. Nobody in the room disagreed. She sat with that. Min Jae's text. A name you're going to recognize. He'd known. He'd known about Avery and he'd tried to warn her, and she'd lain awake for an hour reading it as manipulation, as the next layer of his attempt to control her, and had driven to this building and sat down and been shown the thing he'd tried to tell her. She needed to know how much of the past 4 days was real. The financial information Avery found, she said, the credit accounts, the lease, the LLC, is it accurate? Yes, Reeves said. The documentation is legitimate. We've independently verified it. So she gave me true information. She gave you true information selectively. The picture she provided was accurate as far as it went. She omitted her own account and directed me away from it. She structured your attention toward Min Jae's exposure and Nia Carter's involvement, which are both real, but not complete. Imani looked at the diagram again. The line to Avery's account was heavier than the others. Higher volume, more money than Nia, more than the credit accounts. She looked at the notation beside it and saw a number, and the number was $91,000. 14 months of payments, $91,000. Not $1,500 a month like Nia. More. Much more. What was she paid for, Imani said. Reeves and Chen exchanged a glance. Hart opened a second folder. Ms. Langston has been operating as an information broker, Reeves said. She has connections inside law enforcement, legitimate connections from her professional career, and she has been providing intelligence to Min Jae's organization about active investigations. Watch lists, federal inquiry timelines, when things were moving and when they weren't. Imani felt something go cold behind her sternum. She was telling him when to move, she said. We believe so. For 14 months. Yes. She stopped, started again. I called her first the night I found out. She was the first person I called. We know. And the full shape of it arrived. She called you after I called her. She said she had an informal contact. But she wasn't bringing me to you. She was attempting to reach us first, Reeves said, before you could, to shape the approach, to make herself the cooperative party before you independently filed. Because if I filed independently, without her, the account would have surfaced, and she couldn't control it. That's our assessment, yes. Imani pressed her hands flat on the table, hard, felt the edge of the table against her palms, the physical reality of it, the solidity. Marcus leaned forward. What do you need right now, Ms. Brooks? I need 5 minutes, she said. Nobody argued. She got up and walked to the windows on the far side of the room and stood looking out at the street below. Spring Street, Atlanta, an ordinary Friday morning, cars and pedestrians and a food truck on the corner, and all of it proceeding with the absolute indifference of the world to private catastrophe. And she stood there and breathed her mother, Charlotte. She should call her mother. The thought arrived from somewhere lateral, disconnected from the case, from the room, from all of it. Just the elementary impulse toward someone who had known her longer than anyone else in the world and would not betray her because she was the woman who had made her, and the two of them had spent 32 years being honest with each other, even when it was uncomfortable. She didn't call her mother, she breathed. 4 days. She had spent 4 days building something on a foundation that had a crack in it she couldn't see, because the person who showed her the foundation had known where the crack was and walked her around it. But the information was real. Reeves had confirmed it. The accounts were real. The fraud was real. The LLC was real. Avery had given her the truth in order to use her, but the truth was still the truth, and it was still hers to use. She turned around and walked back to the table and sat down. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. Reeves looked at her. The careful assessment of a man recalibrating. "We need your full cooperation with the investigation. Everything you know about Min Jae's business operations, things you observed, things you were asked to sign, conversations, all of it. I'll give you everything. We also need you to continue behaving normally. If Avery contacts you, we need to know immediately. If Min Jae contacts you, he texted me last night," she said. "I have it." Hart slid a notepad across the table. "Write out the exact text, word for word." She wrote it from memory, handed it back. Reeves read it, passed it to Hart. Hart photographed it. "He knew about Avery's account," Reeves said, "which is interesting. It suggests a level of mutual awareness between all the parties that we're still mapping. Min Jae, Avery, and Nia," she said. "They all knew about each other's involvement. Possibly. We're not certain of Nia Carter's full picture yet. Nia received payments from the LLC. Avery received larger ones. Min Jae runs the LLC. But they all knew I was supposed to be in Savannah that weekend." "Who scheduled your trip to Savannah?" Reeves asked. She stopped. "Aunt Cheryl," she said. "My aunt had a medical episode. I drove down to care for her." She stopped again. The cold thing behind her sternum spread. "Avery knew I was going. I told her the day before I left, and she looked at Reeves. "Is my aunt's medical situation something you've looked at?" Reeves's expression stayed controlled, but something shifted in it. "We haven't examined that angle." "Look at it," she said. She said it quietly. She said it the way you say something when you are very afraid of it being true and very certain that you're right. The meeting continued for another 2 hours. She answered every question. She reconstructed every document she'd signed, every conversation she remembered, every occasion on which Min Jae had been in her home, every time Avery had been there too. And there had been times, she realized now, when both of them had been in her house simultaneously. Holiday dinners, a birthday party 2 years ago. Avery and Min Jae in the same room, both of them part of her life. Both of them, she understood now, part of a structure that had been operating around her and through her for longer than she'd known. When she finally left the building, it was past noon. Marcus walked her to the parking deck. "You did well in there," he said. "I should have done it without Avery." "You couldn't have known." "I should have." She stopped at her car. "She raised me partly. After my father left. She was 11 years older and she treated me like a sister." She stopped. "She's been doing this for 14 months and she sat across from me at Thanksgiving." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. And it was the right thing to say, simple and direct, without any legal framing around it. "What happens to her?" Amani said. "If the government moves forward, and I believe they will, she's looking at serious federal exposure. The information brokering alone is significant. The LLC payments are potentially money laundering charges. What happens to me? Your exposure is managed. You cooperated fully and immediately, you had independent documentation of your victim status, and you've given them more than they expected in there." He paused. "You're going to be okay, Ms. Brooks. I mean that in the specific legal sense." She got in her car. She sat in the parking deck for 3 minutes before she started the engine. 3 minutes of doing nothing, of letting her hands rest on the wheel and her eyes go unfocused and her body have the reaction it had been suppressing since Hart slid that diagram across the table. It wasn't crying. It was something more physical than that. A shaking that started in her hands and moved up her arms and through her chest and expressed itself as a series of controlled, silent convulsions, the kind you make when you are holding the sound of something in because the sound would be too large for the space you're in. She let it go through her. She held the wheel and let it go through her. And when it was done, she was still sitting in her car in the parking deck, and her hands were steady again. She started the engine. She drove home. She was on I-75 when her phone rang through the car speakers. Avery's name on the display. She stared at it for 2 exits. It stopped. It rang again. She answered it. "Hey." Avery's voice. Normal, professionally warm. "How did the meeting go?" Amani kept her eyes on the road. "It was thorough." "Good. Good. Reeves is solid. I told you. Did they show you the full map? They did. A pause, just a fraction of a second too long. All of it?
All of it, Amani said.
Silence. In the silence, she could hear Avery processing, running the calculation, trying to determine how much was confirmed and how much was inference, and whether there was still room to manage this. Imani, don't. She said it the same way she'd said it to Minjae in her kitchen 5 days ago. The word that meant, I know exactly what you're going to do with the next sentence, and I am not going to let you do it. I'm going to ask you one question.
Nothing from the other end. Did you know, Amani said, that Minjae was planning the wedding in my backyard? Silence. Avery, did you know? It's more complicated than, that's a yes, Amani said. Amani, listen to me. I was trying to protect you. Everything I did, the direction I gave you, getting you into that room this morning, I was making sure you came out of this with the best possible. You took $91,000, Amani said.
The silence that followed was absolute. The account, Amani said. The one you didn't show me. The one Reeves already had. $91,000, 14 months, and my name on the LLC that funded it. She kept her voice even, kept her eyes on the highway. You've known about the fraud since before I called you that night. You knew what Minjae was doing with my identity because you were part of what he was doing with it. I kept you safe. You kept yourself in position, she said. When I called you that night, you were already running out of time. The federal inquiry was moving. You needed to be the one who brought me in. You needed my cooperation to look like it came through your professional channel so you could claim you'd been working to expose it from the inside. She paused. How long have you been helping him? Nothing. Avery? How long? 18 months, Avery said, very quietly. 18 months. 6 months before the LLC even existed. She had been feeding information to Minjae's organization since before the financial architecture was built, and she had watched it be built, had known exactly how Amani's name was being used, had sat at her kitchen table and eaten her food and looked her in the face. Amani took the exit for her neighborhood. Her hands were completely steady on the wheel. I need you to understand something, she said. I'm going to be fully cooperative with this investigation. I have already been fully cooperative with this investigation. Everything I know, everything I can access, everything I can remember, it is already in federal hands, including this phone call. She paused. Don't call me again. She hung up. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car and looked at her house. The front of it, the porch. The potted plant she'd put there in the spring. The mailbox that still had her name on it, Imani R. Brooks, in the small adhesive letters she'd put up 3 years ago because the box hadn't had a name, and she'd liked the idea of her name being the first thing visible from the street. Her name. Her name had been so many things these past 14 months. A tool, a signature, a cover, a vehicle. Her name on accounts and leases and utilities, and an LLC. Her name running through a financial structure that served everyone in it but her. She was going to get it back. All of it. Every letter. She got out of the car and went inside, and she was barely through the front door when her phone rang again. Not Avery this time. Not Minjae. A number she recognized because she'd seen it on caller ID once before, 6 months ago, when Minjae had taken a call in her kitchen and stepped out onto the porch to answer it, and come back looking contained in the way he looked when a conversation had required effort. She'd asked who it was, and he'd said business, and she'd let it go. She answered it. A man's voice. Older. Measured in the way of someone accustomed to not being interrupted. Ms. Brooks, I apologize for the direct contact. My name isn't important. What's important is that you understand that the matter we've been discussing through various channels has reached a point where a direct conversation between you and me would be mutually beneficial. She stood in her hallway. Who are you? Someone who has a significant interest in how the next 72 hours unfold. I understand you met with federal representatives this morning. I understand you've been cooperative. A pause. I want to make you an offer. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it. I don't need to. Ms. Brooks. A shift in the voice, not threatening exactly, but the removal of something, a warmth that hadn't been warmth so much as a performance of it. The LLC in your name, the financial instruments. My attorneys can have all of it, every account, every transaction, every document bearing your name, fully discharged and removed within 48 hours. Clean record. No federal entanglement. Complete financial restitution plus substantial compensation for your inconvenience. A pause. In exchange for a single thing. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was tight. What thing? Your withdrawal from the federal inquiry. A statement to your attorney that you've reconsidered your cooperation and wish to pursue the matter through civil channels only. His voice was careful and precise as a scalpel. You would never need to think about any of this again. You would be financially whole and legally clear within 2 business days. She stood in her hallway. She thought about Aunt Cheryl in a hospital bed. She thought about the medical episode that had sent her to Savannah that weekend. She thought about the timing of it, the perfect timing, the way it had created a window that everyone seemed to have known about in advance. She thought about her students picking up their graded tests on Monday. She thought about the rose garden in her backyard and the white flower lying in the dirt at the gate. She thought about her name on $91,000 flowing to Avery Langston, her name on a lease in Midtown, her name on 3 credit accounts purchasing furniture for a life someone else was living, her name on an LLC that served as a cleaning mechanism for money she'd never seen. Her name. No, she said. A pause. I would encourage you to think carefully. I said no. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be loud. Whatever you're offering, however much, however clean, the answer is no. And I want you to understand something. Whatever you decide to do with that answer, whoever you tell, whatever steps come next, I've already documented this call. There are already people who know everything, so whatever you're thinking right now, add that to the calculation. She hung up. She stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then she walked to the kitchen and sat at the table and opened her notebook and wrote down the phone number and the content of the call, word for word, and then she texted the number and the summary to Marcus Webb and to Reeves's contact number, and she set the phone on the table and she sat back and she breathed. It was going to get worse before it got better. She knew that. The call meant the structure above Minjae was moving, was making direct plays, was no longer content to work through attorneys and intermediaries. It meant the federal inquiry had caused enough internal pressure that someone at the top had decided the fastest solution was to buy her out of it. It meant she was more central to this than she'd understood walking in, that her cooperation wasn't just useful, it was necessary, that something in what she knew or what she'd signed was the key piece that made the whole case hold, which meant that if she stayed in, she was in the middle of something large and dangerous and uncertain. And if she stepped back, she handed her name to people who had already spent 14 months using it. There was no version of this that wasn't hard. She understood that now. She had understood it since the parking deck, since the controlled shaking had gone through her and come out the other side. But understanding it intellectually and facing it as a physical fact were different things, and the physical fact was this. She was sitting alone in her kitchen, and somewhere on the other side of a phone call was a man who ran something large enough and connected enough that he could promise to make federal documentation disappear in 48 hours. And he had just been told no by a 7th grade teacher from Atlanta who hadn't eaten a real meal in 4 days. She picked up her pen. She started writing the full account of everything she remembered. Not for Reeves, not for Marcus, not for the case specifically, but for herself. Because she had learned in 32 years that the act of writing things down was how she located herself in the middle of chaos, how she found the thread that connected who she was to what she was doing and why. She wrote about Aunt Cheryl and the drive to Savannah and the back gate swinging open and the music. She wrote about Minjae's hands reaching for Nia's. She wrote about the notebook she'd started that first night and the account she'd found and the document with her forged signature. She wrote about Avery sitting across from her in the back office in Decatur with 3 screens going, and the way the evening light had come through the blinds, and how Amani had felt, in that moment, that she was finally moving in the right direction with someone she trusted beside her. She wrote about sitting in the federal conference room and seeing her cousin's name on a diagram. She wrote until her hand ached. Then she put the pen down. Her phone lit up. Not a call. An alert. A news notification, the kind that arrived when something in her search terms was flagged by an app she barely used. She looked at it. The headline was brief. Atlanta businessman Kang Min Jae's company faces SEC inquiry amid reported fraud allegations. The story had been filed 40 minutes ago. Someone had leaked to the press. Not Reeves. Too early. Too uncontrolled. Someone inside Min Jae's own structure. Someone cutting loose, creating distance. When the structure started to fracture, it did it fast, she was learning, each piece trying to separate from the one below it. Min Jae would see this headline and he would know the ground had shifted. Her phone rang. Min Jae. She stared at it. She thought, "You have one conversation left with this man. Make it count." She answered. "I saw the text," he said immediately. His voice was different now. The control was there, but it was working harder, like a lid on something. "I know you went to the building. I know you talked to Reeves. I know—" "Someone just called me," she said. "From your organization. They made me an offer." Silence. "I said no," she said. More silence.
Min Jae, she kept her voice completely flat. "I need you to tell me one thing. Did you know what Avery was doing? Did you know she was my cousin when you recruited her?" The pause before he answered was the length of a man deciding whether the truth still cost him anything. "Yes," he said. She closed her eyes. 1 second. "You found her," she said. "You researched me. You found my cousin who had federal connections, and you recruited her before you were with me, or at the beginning of it, specifically because of her access to me." "Imani, was any of it real?" she said. 4 years. Any piece of it?" The silence was very long. "Yes," he said, and then quieter. That's what made it impossible to stop. She sat at the kitchen table in the house with her name on the mailbox outside, and the rose garden in the backyard, and the string light she'd strung herself on a Saturday in May, and she held the phone and she breathed once. "I'm going to finish this," she said, "and when it's done, I never want to hear your voice again." She hung up. She sat in the kitchen as the afternoon light moved across the floor, and she did not move, and she did not speak. And she was completely, utterly alone with the weight of what was coming. The depositions, the federal proceedings, the press that would arrive, the exposure, the long and grinding work of reclaiming her name from every document and system and account where it had been planted without her knowledge. And she sat with all of it. And she did not move for a long time. The afternoon light completed its slow transit across the kitchen floor, starting at the edge of the table, reaching the middle, touching the far wall, and she sat in it and let it move and did not chase it. The phone was on the table in front of her. The notebook was open. The pen was down. Outside, the neighborhood was doing what neighborhoods do in the late afternoon. A lawnmower somewhere 2 streets over. A child called in for dinner. The specific slant of September light that made ordinary things look briefly beautiful and then ordinary again. She was not falling apart. She had expected to at some point in the past 5 days. She had expected a moment where the accumulation of it would exceed what she could contain and something would give. But what she found instead, sitting in the kitchen with Min Jae's last words still in the air, was a kind of clarification, like water that has been stirred going finally still, and you can see the bottom again. She picked up the pen. She wrote one more thing in the notebook. "The work is the only thing that was ever mine." She closed it. She called Marcus Webb. He answered on the second ring, and she told him about the phone call from the unnamed man, the offer, the exact words. She heard him writing. When she finished, he said, "You did exactly right." And she said, "I know." And he said, "I want you to come in tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, different location, my office. We need to go through the full sequence before Reeves schedules the formal deposition. Are you okay?" "I'm functional," she said. "That's enough," he said. "For right now, that's enough." She hung up and made herself eat. Not eggs this time, but actual food. Rice and vegetables she found in the refrigerator, standing over the stove and cooking with the automatic movements of someone who has fed themselves alone long enough that the process requires no thought. She ate at the kitchen table. She tasted it. She washed the dish. She went to bed at 9:15 and slept without interruption until 5:40 in the morning, which was the longest she'd slept in a week. The deposition happened 11 days later. It was 4 hours and 17 minutes long, and Imani answered every question without notes, because she had written everything down so many times in her notebook that the sequence had become structural. Not memory exactly,
more like architecture, something she could move through in any direction and know where she was. The federal attorney asked precise questions, and she gave precise answers, and Marcus sat beside her and intervened twice, both times on procedural grounds, both times correctly. When it was over, Reeves walked her to the elevator himself. He was not a man who showed approval through expression. His face maintained its careful professional neutrality, but he said, before the elevator doors opened, "You're a very composed witness, Ms. Brooks." And she understood that was the most he would offer, and that it was significant coming from him. "I had good practice," she said. 32 seventh graders. You learn to keep your face still." He almost smiled. The elevator closed. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. People expected the aftermath of catastrophe to be dramatic, but the truth was that it was mostly administrative. Paperwork, phone calls, meetings with Marcus, communications with the credit agencies to initiate the fraud dispute process, hours spent on hold with financial institutions that had elaborate verification systems and limited human patience. She learned to navigate those systems with the same methodical attention she brought to everything. She kept notes. She followed up. She did not lose her temper on a single phone call, not because she wasn't angry, but because anger was inefficient, and she did not have time to be inefficient. She went back to teaching the Monday after the deposition. She stood in front of her seventh graders and handed back their reading comprehension tests, and they received them with the full range of seventh grade emotional responses: relief, disappointment, the particular devastation of a child who studied hard and still got a C, the poorly concealed satisfaction of a child who didn't study and got a B anyway. She moved through all of it. She taught the lesson she'd planned. She answered questions. She stayed after for 20 minutes with a student named Darnell, who was struggling with inference questions and who needed someone to sit beside him and work through the logic slowly, step by step. She drove home. She sat in her car in the driveway and felt the specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding two lives simultaneously: the life everyone sees and the one that's being rebuilt in private. And then she got out and went inside and made coffee and kept going. The credit accounts were closed and formally disputed within 3 weeks. The LLC dissolution took longer. Corporate filings moved at their own geological pace. But Marcus managed it. The Midtown lease, in which her name had appeared as co-signer, was formally disputed and removed from her record in the 5th week, which was slower than she'd wanted and faster than Marcus had projected. She marked each resolution in the notebook. Not celebrating, marking, recording. The way you record the progress of something that requires sustained attention and will not reward impatience. Avery was arrested on a Thursday. Amani found out through a news alert the same way she'd found out about the SEC inquiry. A brief headline, a smaller story than she'd expected, the particular compression that happens when a complicated thing is summarized for general consumption. She read it once. She put the phone down. She did not feel the thing she'd expected to feel, which was satisfaction, or the other thing, which was grief. She felt something flatter and more durable than either. She thought about Avery at 9 years old chasing her around the backyard of her grandmother's house. Avery at 20 teaching her to drive in an empty parking lot in Decatur, patient in a way she wasn't patient about most things. Avery at 31 flying to Atlanta for 3 days when Amani's father died without being asked, just showing up with a bag and a car, and the specific competence of someone who knew that grief required management more than comfort. She thought about all of that and she held it alongside what she now knew, and she let both things be true simultaneously because they were. Then she made dinner and graded papers and went to bed. Minjae's situation moved faster than Avery's. The SEC inquiry combined with the federal financial crimes investigation created a pressure that his organization could not redistribute or absorb. Business partners who had known him for a decade began the formal process of distance, not publicly, not immediately, but in the language of organizations: unreturned calls, restructured agreements, the careful administrative erasure of association. Political allies who had attended his events and taken his calls went quiet. His company's public-facing operations continued because structures that size have inertia, but the people inside them were reading the pressure correctly and beginning to plan for a different landscape. The settlement offer came through Marcus in the 6th week. She was in the school parking lot when Marcus called. She'd just finished a parent conference and was sitting in her car with her coat still on, and he laid it out with the precision she'd come to rely on. Full financial restitution, every dollar from the fraudulent credit accounts, the $11,000 she'd lent him, lost interest calculated at a rate his attorneys had proposed, and Marcus had countered up, plus a separate amount for legal fees and what Marcus called material distress. The total number he named was large enough that she had to make herself not react to it, to hear it as an amount rather than as a verdict. He's also agreed to a full written acknowledgement, Marcus said. A notarized statement admitting his role in the identity fraud, the forged documents, the unauthorized use of your name. That goes into the permanent record. And Avery's account, she said, the $91,000. That's a separate criminal matter, Marcus said. The government handles that piece, but Minjai's settlement doesn't impede it. Does it protect him from anything? It settles the civil claims between the two of you. It doesn't touch the federal criminal exposure, which is ongoing. He's still looking at significant federal liability, Amani. The civil settlement is him trying to reduce the total damage. She looked out the windshield at the school building. A kid on the basketball court near the side entrance was practicing free throws alone, shooting and retrieving, with the particular patience of someone who has decided to get good at something. I'll sign, she said. You're sure? I want his written acknowledgement more than I want to fight him in civil court for the next 2 years, she said. I want a document with his signature that says what he did. I want that in existence. I'll proceed, Marcus said. She watched the kid make 2 free throws in a row and miss the third. Marcus, she said. Thank you for all of it. You did the work, he said. I just made sure the room was set up correctly. She signed the settlement documents the following Tuesday. Minjai's written acknowledgement arrived the same day, notarized, formal, in the language of legal documents that strips the human quality from things to make them portable and usable. But the facts were there. Her name. His name. What had been done. What it had cost. What he acknowledged. She read it once. She put it in a folder. She put the folder in the file cabinet in her home office. She closed the drawer. The confrontation with Nia happened not because she planned it, but because the city was not large enough for 2 people to avoid each other indefinitely, particularly when they moved in overlapping circles. And on a Saturday afternoon in October, Amani walked into the coffee shop 3 blocks from her house, the one she'd been going to for 6 years, the one with the good Ethiopian blend and the uncomfortable chairs that she liked anyway because the discomfort kept her focused. And Nia was there, sitting at the small table near the window, alone. A cup in front of her that she wasn't drinking. She looked up when the door opened and saw Imani, and for a moment neither of them moved, the way animals sometimes go still when they find themselves in unexpected proximity to something that might determine how the next few seconds go. Imani ordered her coffee. She waited for it. She paid. She turned around and looked at Nia at the table by the window and made a decision that surprised her slightly. She walked over. She set her cup down across from Nia's and sat down. Nia looked like someone who had been through something, not the polished, arranged version of herself that she'd maintained even in the worst of their previous conversations. This was simpler, less constructed. She was wearing a plain sweatshirt and her locks were pulled back, and there were circles under her eyes that suggested a persistent deficit of sleep. I'm not here to fight you, Amani said. I'm not here to give you anything to take back. I'm here because I want coffee, and this is my coffee shop. Nia said nothing. But since we're here, Amani said, she drank some of her coffee. She set it down. I know you've been subpoenaed, she said. I know you cooperated with the federal investigation. I know what you told them about the payments, about how much you knew. She paused. I don't know if any of that was because you wanted to do the right thing or because your attorney told you cooperation was your best option. Nia's jaw tightened. Does it matter? A little, Amani said. Not enough to change anything, but a little. Nia looked at the table. Her hands were wrapped around her cup and the knuckles were slightly pale. I told them the truth, she said, about what I knew, when I knew it. She stopped. It was more than I told you. I knew about the first credit account before the 3rd month. Minjai told me it was... He made it sound like a joint arrangement, something you were both involved in. She stopped again. I believed him because I wanted to. I know, Amani said. I kept telling myself you'd be fine, that you had this capacity that I never had, this ability to land on your feet, and that whatever happened you would be... She stopped, looked up. That sounds like an excuse. It is an excuse, Imani said. But it's also something true about how you thought about me. And that's its own kind of thing. She held her cup with both hands. You've envied me for a long time. Nia didn't deny it. That was something. The fact that she didn't reach for the denial. I used to think that was a compliment, Imani said. Someone wanting what you have. I don't think that anymore. She looked out the window at the street. Envy isn't about the person being envied. It's about the person feeling it. You didn't see me. You saw what you didn't have, and you used me as a mirror for your own deficits for 12 years. And I didn't notice because I was too busy caring about you to look at how you were looking at me. Nia's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Imani said. I'm telling you because I spent 12 years being your best friend, and for 12 years some significant part of what you brought to our friendship was resentment. And I deserve better than that. Not because I'm exceptional, because everyone deserves to be in a friendship where the other person actually sees them. A tear moved down Nia's face. She didn't wipe it. I'm sorry, Nia said. And this time it had a different quality. Not the frantic apology of a person trying to stop consequences, but something flatter and more final. The kind of sorry that knows it can't undo anything and says itself anyway, because not saying it would be worse. I know, Imani said. She finished her coffee. She stood up. You didn't steal something better than yourself, she said. She said it quietly, without performance, looking at Nia directly. You destroyed yourself trying to steal what was never yours. She picked up her cup. She walked out. The trial, or rather the federal proceedings, which were not a single dramatic trial, but a series of hearings and motions and negotiations that unfolded over many months with the bureaucratic patience of systems designed for precision rather than narrative, resolved in the way that federal cases often resolve, not with a verdict announced in a courtroom the way films depict it, but with agreements reached in offices, with charges that were reduced or maintained, with sentencing that came down in increments. She was not present for most of it. Marcus kept her informed. She asked specific questions when she needed to understand the mechanics and accepted the summaries when she didn't. Avery pleaded guilty to 2 counts of federal fraud. The sentencing was 6 months into the following year, and Imani did not go to the courthouse. She taught that day. She went home. She sat in her backyard that evening, and the string lights were on. She'd taken them down and put them back up, her own choice, because she was not going to cede her own backyard to what had happened in it. And she sat there in the October dark, and she thought about her cousin, and she let herself feel it. The full weight of it, the grief of it, because Avery had been real to her, and the grief of losing someone who was real to you did not require them to have been good. You could mourn the person and understand what they'd done simultaneously. She was learning to hold more than one true thing at a time. Minjae's federal exposure resulted in a consent agreement with the SEC and a separate criminal plea on 1 count of financial fraud. His organization survived in reduced form, structures that large have survival mechanisms that outlast their architects. His name appeared in business news periodically after that, smaller stories. A man managing the aftermath of a public unraveling. She did not follow the coverage closely. She did not need to. The settlement money arrived in 2 installments. She put the first installment into savings and did not think about it for 3 weeks, because she had learned that decisions made immediately after receiving something significant tend to reflect the stress of the moment rather than the clarity of purpose. When 3 weeks had passed, she looked at the number and thought carefully about what it was. Not a reward, not justice, exactly, but restitution. The restoration of something taken, which was a different category entirely. She put a portion of it toward a tutoring program. She'd been thinking about it for years, a structured after-school operation for students in her district who needed academic support, but whose families couldn't afford private tutoring. She'd thought about it abstractly, the way you think about things that require more time and money and stability than your current life can provide. Now she had the money. She had the time, because she was no longer spending her energy managing a relationship built on managed information. She had the stability, or was building it, one documented resolution at a time. She found a space. She hired 2 tutors. She built a curriculum. She named the program something simple, the Brooks Program, because it was hers and she was done with indirection. The first cohort was 12 students. By the spring, it was 23. By the following fall, it had a waiting list. She repainted the backyard fence in November.
a deep green, the color she'd always wanted and never committed to because Min Jae had said it would clash with the siding, which it didn't. She painted it herself over 2 weekends, with the specific physical satisfaction of doing a thing with your hands that results in something visible and lasting. She stood back on the second Sunday afternoon and looked at it and felt something she recognized after a moment as pleasure. Plain, uncomplicated pleasure in a green fence and a clear afternoon in her own hands slightly speckled with paint. She rearranged the string lights. Not different lights, the same ones because they were good lights and she liked them and they were hers. But a different configuration, the wire running from the oak tree to a new hook she put in the porch overhang. The coverage wider now, more even. Better, actually. Better than they'd been before. The rose garden she left alone. The roses didn't need her to do anything to them. They were alive. They'd been alive through everything. Through the wedding and the investigation and the depositions and the winter, coming back in the spring the way perennial things do, with the complete indifference to human drama that makes plants either maddening or reassuring depending on what you need from them. She needed to be reassured by them. She weeded around them in March. She fed them in April. In May, they bloomed in the specific deep red she'd chosen 3 years ago from a catalog and had never regretted. She sat in the backyard on a Saturday evening in late September, almost exactly a year from the night she'd driven back from Savannah and pushed open the gate. The lights were on. The fence was green. The roses had finished their second bloom of the season and were resting. The evening was warm enough for a light jacket and cool enough to make you aware of the season changing, that particular edge in the air that Atlanta gets in September, which is not quite autumn, but is the first honest suggestion of it. She had a glass of iced tea on the small table beside her chair. She had nothing she needed to do tonight. Darnell, her student who'd struggled with inference questions, had passed his end-of-year reading assessment with a score that put him above grade level for the first time in 3 years. She'd kept the paper copy of his score report because he'd given it to her after class with an expression of stunned disbelief that she understood completely, because she too knew what it felt like to find out you were capable of something you'd been told was not for you. She thought about the drive back from Savannah a year ago, the radio playing low, the quarter tank of gas she hadn't stopped to fill, the unremarkable chain of small decisions that had brought her home 30 minutes early and through the back gate instead of the front door and into a view of her own backyard that had rearranged everything. She thought about what she had lost. She was not the kind of person who minimized loss. She had watched people do that, watched them compress grief into something manageable and presentable, and she had always understood that the compression was a way of not living in the full dimension of your own experience. She had lost 4 years of her life that she had given in good faith to a structure built on bad faith. She had lost a best friend who had never, as it turned out, been exactly the friend she'd thought she was. She had lost her cousin, who was in federal custody, who she had loved since childhood, who had looked at her and seen an asset, and who she still missed sometimes in the mornings with a specificity that ambushed her when she wasn't prepared for it. Those losses were real. She didn't compact them or reframe them or sand their edges into something more acceptable. She just also refused to be defined by them. That was the distinction she'd found. Not that the losses didn't matter, not that she'd moved past them or healed from them or converted them into strength, the way people in stories were supposed to convert their worst experiences into something purposeful. The losses were still losses. They were just not the only true things. She was also a woman who had kept her composure in a federal conference room when the last person she trusted appeared on a fraud diagram. She was also a woman who had said no to an unnamed man with resources she couldn't fully calculate, and had kept saying no every time the question was rephrased. She was also a woman who had finished grading a stack of reading tests on the night her world came apart because 32 students needed those tests back on Monday, and she was their teacher, and that was real work that required her attention. She was the woman who painted her own fence green. She finished her iced tea. The lights were warm against the darkening sky. The same lights, strung differently, casting the same gold they always had over the same garden, and the same roses, and the same fence that was now a better color. She sat in the quiet of her backyard, and the city moved around her. The low, distant sound of Atlanta on a Saturday evening, traffic and music, and the particular ambient hum of a city that does not stop. And she was part of it, and separate from it, and entirely herself. She wasn't thinking about Min Jae. She wasn't thinking about Avery.
She wasn't thinking about Naya, or the white dress, or the ranunculus fallen in the dirt, or the sound of wedding music in air that should have been ordinary. She was thinking about the tutoring program, about a curriculum adjustment she wanted to make to the reading comprehension module, about whether she had the materials ordered for October, about Darnell and his test score and the 12 other students with waiting potential that just needed the right room and the right patients to come forward. She was thinking about the green fence and whether she wanted to put a trellis along it next spring, something for climbing roses, a different variety than what she had, something that would grow vertical and take up the height of the fence and look, by summer, like something she had planned from the beginning. She was thinking about next summer. That was the thing she noticed, sitting in the warm September dark with her empty glass in her quiet yard. She was thinking about next summer, about what she wanted the backyard to look like, about what she wanted the program to have accomplished by then, about her students, who would be 8th graders next year, who would move through her classroom and carry pieces of what she'd taught them into their lives the way students always do, mostly without knowing it. She was thinking forward, not because the past was resolved. It wasn't fully, and it wouldn't be for a long time, maybe not completely, because that was the truth about serious damage, that it left traces you kept finding in drawers and in the back corners of the mind years later. But because the past had its shape now. It was legible. She could look at it directly and know what she was looking at, and that was different from what it had been a year ago, when she'd been living inside a structure she couldn't see. She could see it now, and she had looked at it clearly, and she had done what needed doing, and she had come back to her yard and her lights and her roses and her fence. She was not the same woman who had driven back from Savannah with her tank at a quarter, thinking about a leaky sink and a stack of ungraded tests. She was not diminished from that woman either. She was something the same woman became when she was required to find out what she was made of, and found out the answer was more than she'd needed to know before, and exactly enough for what came after. The lights glowed, the roses rested, the city hummed, and Amani Brooks sat in her own backyard in the September dark, alone and entirely undestroyed, and let the evening settle around her like something she had earned, not because she had won, but because she had never stopped being the one who stayed.